She sits alone on a stone bench outside Courtroom 7. Her hands are folded in her lap. Her silver hair is perfect. Her gray dress does not have a single wrinkle. Eleanor Constance Whitmore Ashford is 67 years old, and she is sitting by herself in a courthouse on the coldest morning of the year, and she looks composed. That is the heartbreaking part. Not broken, not weeping, not searching the street for someone who might be coming, just composed. The way a woman is composed when she has already grieved every version of rescue and arrived, quietly and without drama, at the decision that she would simply have to be enough. Inside, in Courtroom 7, the noise is different. Gerald Whitmore moves through the space the way he has moved through every space for 40 years, like the room belongs to him, and the other people in it are merely furnishings. He is laughing. Openly. Loudly. With the particular laugh of a man who believes the outcome of the next 4 hours is already settled. His attorney, Douglas Hargrove, leans close and says something in a low voice, and Gerald laughs again, and the sound of it carries all the way to the double doors. Several of Gerald's associates, men in expensive suits with expensive watches, sit in the gallery behind him. They are relaxed. They are smiling. They are the audience at a performance they are certain will be satisfying. Eleanor enters alone. She pushes open the heavy courtroom door herself. No one stands. No one comes forward to take her coat or guide her to her seat. Her young attorney, Miriam Cross, gives her an apologetic, helpless smile from their table, as if apologizing in advance for what she cannot prevent. Eleanor sets her cognac bag on the table with quiet precision. She sits. She folds her hands. Across the aisle, Gerald Whitmore turns in his chair and looks at her. And he smiles. Not warmly. The other kind. The kind that says, "Look at you. Look at how alone you are." Long beat of silence. A clock somewhere in the building ticks. Eleanor does not look back at him. She simply sits. And the terrible morning begins. The story, as Douglas Hargrove presents it to the courtroom with smooth, practiced condescension, is simple. Gerald Whitmore, he explains, is a self-made man, a man who built his commercial real estate empire from a modest inheritance and 40 years of relentless work. And this woman, he gestures toward Eleanor with the casual economy of a man pointing out a piece of furniture. This woman, his former wife of 31 years, is attempting to claim a share of assets she contributed nothing toward. He uses the word nothing the way people use hammers. Mrs. Whitmore, Hargrove continues, his voice carrying the polished resonance of a man who bills £400 per hour and knows it, brought no professional credentials to this marriage. No business acumen. No financial contribution of significance. She was, by her own social presentation, a housewife. A companion. Decorative, one might say, in the way that expensive things are decorative. There is a sound from the gallery. It takes Eleanor a moment to understand that it is suppressed laughter. She does not turn around. Hargrove presses forward. She has arrived today without private legal representation of any meaningful standing. He lets that sit in the air. Miriam Cross straightens her glasses and looks at her papers. She has arrived without financial guarantors, without expert witnesses of note, without character witnesses of any consequence. Another pause. Longer, more deliberate. She has arrived, quite simply, alone. He says the word alone the way a verdict is delivered. Gerald Whitmore, watching Eleanor from across the aisle, makes a sound. It is almost sympathetic. Almost. The performance of a man pretending to feel something he absolutely does not feel. "Your Honor," he says, when Hargrove invites him to speak, "I feel genuinely sorry for Eleanor." "I do." His voice is warm, calculated warmth, the kind manufactured by men who understand that controlled emotion reads as sincerity to the uninformed. "She was my wife for 31 years. I cared for her. I provided for her. I gave her a beautiful life. And now she wants to take what isn't hers." He shakes his head, sorrowfully. I simply cannot allow that. The gallery murmurs approvingly. Miriam Cross stands. She is trying. Eleanor can see that she is genuinely trying. She presents her arguments with clarity and earnest precision. The marital contribution statutes, the precedents in asset division, the 31 years of domestic service as calculable economic contribution. She speaks well. She is not wrong. But she is outgunned, and everyone in Courtroom 7 can feel it, and the feeling has the particular cruelty of watching someone try to stop a flood with their bare hands. One of Gerald's associates, a heavy-set man in the gallery with a gold watch that catches the courtroom lighting, leans toward another and whispers something. The other man looks at Eleanor and smiles. Eleanor sees it. She sees all of it. She has seen things like this her entire married life, the casual, confident dismissal of a woman in a room full of men who have decided she is not worth serious regard. She knows this particular variety of humiliation. It has the comfortable familiarity of an old wound being pressed. What is new is the scale of the audience. What is new is the way Gerald watches her absorb it, openly, without pretense now, with a satisfaction so complete it borders on something uglier than contempt. We will demonstrate, Hargrove continues, that Mrs. Whitmore has no financial support, no legal resources of consequence, and no realistic means to challenge this proceeding. We ask, Your Honor, for expedient resolution. Expedient. As if Eleanor is an inconvenient errand. Something to be filed and closed. Judge Okafor's expression remains precisely neutral. She writes something. She does not betray whether she sees what Eleanor sees. Miriam leans toward Eleanor and whispers, I'm so sorry. I'm doing everything I can. Eleanor turns to look at her young attorney, this earnest, overwhelmed young woman who is trying so hard with so little, and she places one hand over Miriam's hand on the table. I know you are, Eleanor says quietly. That is all I am asking. She turns back to the front. She does not look afraid. That, too, is a kind of ache, a woman so practiced at appearing unafraid that she has made it into art. The music shifts, something older, more textured, strings now, with a faint strain of something aristocratic beneath them. A montage of memory begins, woven through Eleanor's stillness. What Douglas Hargrove does not know, what Gerald Whitmore, in his 31 years of marriage to this woman, chose willfully never to properly learn, is who Eleanor Constance Ashford was before she became Eleanor Whitmore, and why she chose to walk into this courtroom alone. The Ashford family is not a name that appears in gossip columns or on the guest lists of parties that welcome cameras. It is a name that appears in histories, in the architectural records of 3 counties, on the dedications of hospital wings and university endowments and charitable foundations that have operated continuously for 114 years without ever requiring public acknowledgement to sustain them. The Ashford family is the kind of old that has learned patience the way mountains learn patience, not as a virtue, but as a geological fact. Eleanor's father, Cornelius Ashford, turned 91 in September. He had built nothing from nothing, because there had never been nothing. But what he had done, across 6 decades of quiet, devastating business acumen, was take a considerable inheritance and multiply it into something that would have been called an empire if the Ashfords had been the kind of family who used words like empire. They were not. They used words like responsibility and stewardship and, occasionally, when pushed, consequence. Eleanor was their only daughter. She grew up in Ashford Hall in Wiltshire, a Georgian country house of 17 rooms set in 40 acres, with a library that had been curated for 200 years, and a garden that had been written about in 3 separate horticultural journals. She was educated at Rodian, then read history at St. Hilda's College, Oxford, graduating with first-class honors in 1979. She spoke French natively. Her grandmother, Lady Vivienne, was Parisian by birth and conversational Italian. She had spent summers in Provence, winters in Edinburgh, and one formative year at 23 working quietly within the family's charitable foundation, restructuring their community health program in ways that are still bearing fruit 40 years later. She was not, in any meaningful sense of the word, simply decorative. When she met Gerald Whitmore at a professional charity dinner in 1982, he was charming and ambitious, and she was in a chapter of her life where charm felt like enough. She married him against her father's quiet, careful counsel. Not against his explicit objection. Cornelius Ashford was not a man who overrode his daughter's choices, but against his considered, privately expressed hesitation. That man, her father had said only once, is interested in who he thinks you are. Watch carefully whether he is interested in who you actually are. She had not watched carefully enough. For 31 years, she had been Gerald's wife, which meant, in Gerald's understanding of the word, she had been Gerald's background. She had raised their children and run their 3 homes with an invisible, flawless efficiency that Gerald converted, in his own accounting of their marriage, into something he had simply provided the conditions for. She had quietly managed the household foundation work, had served on 2 regional boards, had mentored young women through the professional charitable network, none of which Gerald registered as work because none of it came with a salary he had issued. She had also, quietly, with her father's guidance, maintained her own financial structures entirely separate from Gerald's. The Ashford Trust, the foundation interests, the property in her name alone that Gerald never asked about because he was too proud to admit he did not understand it. When the marriage finally, inevitably ended, when she discovered the offshore accounts, the younger woman, the decade of systematic financial maneuvering Gerald had been conducting against the marital estate, she did something that confused everyone who knew her. She told her family, and then she asked them to wait. She had explained to her brother Sebastian, to try this first. Alone. I need to know what these men do when they think no one is watching. I need the court to see what Gerald is when he believes there are no consequences. Sebastian had looked at her for a long moment. You're building a record, he said. I am building a portrait, she corrected. There is a difference. Her grandmother, Lady Vivienne, had said nothing when Eleanor explained the plan. She had simply taken Eleanor's hand in both of her ancient, beringed hands and held it. Then she had said, in the French that was always her language for serious things, Tu n'es jamais soli. Rappelle-toi. Quand le moment viendra, nous serons elle. You are never alone. Remember that. When the moment comes, we will be there. Eleanor had carried those words into the courtroom today, folded against her heart like a letter. The moment was coming. She could feel it in the way she had always been able to feel things. The particular electricity in the air before weather changes. The moment was almost here. The music draws tighter. The cello returns, but with a low rhythmic pulse beneath it now. Something is building. By 11 o'clock, Douglas Hargrove was at the height of his performance. He had submitted financial documentation. He had called a forensic accountant whose testimony was lengthy and delivered in the clipped, authoritative shorthand of someone who has learned that confident incomprehensibility often reads as expertise. He had entered 3 decades of Gerald's business records into evidence, each one a testament to Gerald's commercial brilliance, or so they were framed, with the careful curation of records that had been selectively assembled. Gerald sat at his table with the ease of a man on his own sofa. He had crossed one leg over the other. He had checked his watch, not because he was impatient, but because checking a watch is the body language of a man who has places to be after his victory and wants the room to know it. At one point, he turned to one of his associates in the gallery and gave a small, satisfied nod. Almost there. Hargrove's voice carried the warmth of approaching finality. Your Honor, what we see before us today is a straightforward matter of contribution and entitlement. Mrs. Whitmore's claim is unsupported by legal precedent of sufficient weight, is unaccompanied by financial or expert resources of meaningful caliber, and is, he paused. Something at the back of the courtroom. A sound. Not loud, not dramatic, just a sound. The sound of the large courtroom doors behind the public gallery opening slowly, with the specific weighted friction of old hinges on heavy timber. Hargrove did not stop speaking. It was a courthouse. Doors opened, but 3 people in the gallery turned. Gerald did not turn. He was too practiced in the theater of courtroom dominance to look at minor disruptions. Miriam Cross, however, looked up from her papers, and something changed in her face. It was not a dramatic change. It was the face of a young woman who has just seen something she does not quite have context for, something that her instincts are trying to classify before her brain has caught up. Her eyes widened fractionally. Her pen stopped moving. She looked at Eleanor. Eleanor was still looking at the front of the courtroom, but the corner of her mouth barely perceptibly moved. Outside, in the corridor beyond Courtroom 7, footsteps. Not rushed, not tentative. The measured, deliberate footsteps of people who are not in a hurry because they have never needed to be. The footsteps of people who understand that tempo is a form of authority and that arriving with urgency is what people do when they are not sure they will be received. These people were entirely sure. There were also, behind those footsteps, other sounds, the subtle click of a wheelchair, the low murmur of voices, the crisp shift of leather document cases being settled, the particular atmospheric charge of people who carry weight entering a space that was about to feel it. Hargrove continued speaking. Gerald continued not turning. Judge Okafor glanced toward the rear doors. She wrote something, and Eleanor Ashford, not Whitmore, never truly Whitmore, sat with her hands folded and her spine straight and her silver hair perfect in its chignon, and she breathed. Slowly, steadily, like a woman who is counting down. The music drops to almost nothing, a single sustained note, barely audible. This section is quiet. It is the last quiet before everything changes. Hargrove returned to his table. He picked up a document. He adjusted his approach. Your Honor, I would like to submit a final motion requesting that this proceeding be expedited to summary judgment given the demonstrable imbalance of Mr. Hargrove. Judge Okafor's voice was measured. I'll ask you to allow me to determine the pace of these proceedings. A small beat. Of course, Your Honor. In the silence that followed, Miriam leaned toward Eleanor and whispered, very quietly, with the controlled urgency of a woman trying not to show how afraid she was, they're going to push for summary judgment. If they get it, we won't have time to present the counter-evidence properly. I'm not sure I have enough to, Miriam. Eleanor's voice was perfectly calm. I know. Mrs. Whitmore, Eleanor. She corrected her gently, and I know. It's all right. It isn't. Miriam's voice cracked, barely. I came into this case 3 weeks before trial. I should have had 6 months. I should have had, you deserved better than what I could give you, and I'm so sorry, I am genuinely, you did not fail me, Eleanor said. She said it with a finality that was not dismissive. It was the finality of truth delivered with love. I want you to understand that. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, you did not fail me. Miriam stared at her. Whatever happens in the next few minutes. Across the aisle, Gerald had uncrossed his leg and leaned forward. He was murmuring with Hargrove, final strategy, the clean satisfaction of a man positioning his pieces for the kill. He looked once at Eleanor. Just once. A last look. The way you look at something you are finished with. And in that look was 31 years of underestimation. 31 years of looking at this woman, this composed, silver-haired, quietly extraordinary woman, and seeing only what he had decided to see. The companion. The background. the expensive, decorative arrangement of a human being who existed to reflect his life back to him in flattering ways. He had never once asked himself what existed behind her composure. He had never once wondered what she was made of beneath the silk. He had never once, in 3 decades, thought to ask, "Who is this woman's family?" Beat of silence, so complete it has weight. Eleanor sat, alone. The courtroom light fell on her dove-gray dress, on her pearl earrings, on her silver hair, on her folded hands. She looked, to every person in that room who did not know better, like a woman at the end of her resources, like a woman who had run out of road, like a woman who had come to the end of herself. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and Eleanor Constance Ashford closed her eyes for just 1 second. And she breathed, and she waited for her family to come home to her.
The music does not swell immediately.
That is the choice that makes it devastating. There is first only silence and then footsteps. And then the silence of a room that has suddenly forgotten how to speak. The doors of Courtroom 7 opened fully, both of them, at the same time, pushed wide by 2 individuals in dark suits who held them open with the practiced efficiency of people who have spent careers ensuring that certain entrances happen without impediment. And then the room changed. It did not change loudly. It did not change with fanfare or drama or announcement. It changed the way pressure changes when a barometric front moves in. Something atmospheric, something that the human nervous system registers before the human brain has processed the information. Several people in the gallery straightened involuntarily. One of Gerald's associates stopped mid-sentence. The forensic accountant, still seated in the witness area, looked up from his papers. Hargrove turned. Sebastian Ashford entered first. 6'3", in a charcoal suit of such flawless cut that it registered as a statement before anyone noticed it consciously. Silver hair, Eleanor's eyes, the leather document case held easily in one hand, and a full barrister's portfolio under his other arm. He walked with the particular unhurried confidence of a man who has spent 40 years entering rooms that needed him more than he needed them. Behind him came 4 associates, young, razor-sharp, moving with coordinated efficiency, each carrying document cases, each dressed with the understated precision of people who work for an organization that does not need to announce its quality. The gallery began to murmur. Gerald turned halfway in his seat. He did not yet understand what he was seeing. His brain was still processing, filing the visual information against his expectations, and finding that the categories did not match. Then Cornelius Ashford entered the room, and the murmur stopped. 91 years old, 6 feet of him, upright, astonishingly, magnificently upright, moving with the carved ebony cane that he carried not for balance, but for bearing. Midnight charcoal, 3-piece suit. White pocket square. The Ashford signet ring catching the light. And that face, that extraordinary granite-carved, aquiline-nosed, deep-eyed face, turned toward the front of the courtroom with the expression of a man who has arrived to observe the righting of something that should never have been wronged. He was 91 years old, and he walked into Courtroom 7 as if the building had been constructed for this specific purpose. The gallery did not just murmur now. The gallery recognized. 2 journalists in the public seats, present for what they had assumed was a routine matrimonial dispute, were typing on their phones before Cornelius had reached the middle of the room. One of them whispered a name. Cornelius Ashford. The name moved through the gallery like a current. And then, and this is the moment that Courtroom 7 would remember for as long as any person in it lived, the wheelchair came through the door. Lady Vivienne Ashford Rousseau, 94 years old, in deep violet, with her ropes of pearls and her sapphire and diamond brooch and her ancient, dark, fathomless eyes and her white hair set in perfect waves, was wheeled into the courtroom by a discreet personal attendant who positioned her chair with the precision of long practice. She was tiny in that chair. She was enormous in that room. Your Honor? Sebastian Ashford's voice, when he spoke, was not loud. It had never needed to be loud. It carried with the natural resonance of a man who had argued cases before the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court and had never once needed to raise his voice to be heard and believed. Sebastian Ashford, Senior Partner, Ashford and Associates. Solicitors and barristers of record for Mrs. Eleanor Constance Ashford, formerly Whitmore. I apologize for the unconventional timing of our full entry into these proceedings. That timing was deliberate and strategic, and I am prepared to explain it fully to the court. Judge Okafor looked at Sebastian Ashford. She looked at the portfolio. She looked at the four associates arraying themselves with calm, military precision. She looked at Cornelius Ashford, who had taken a seat directly behind Eleanor's table and was now looking at the back of his daughter's silver head with an expression of such quiet, controlled ferocity that it was almost difficult to witness. She looked at Lady Vivienne, who was already looking at Gerald Whitmore. Just looking at him. With those ancient, dark, devastating eyes. With the expression of a woman who has seen 94 years of the world and its varieties of men and has reached a settled, permanent conclusion about this particular variety. Mr. Ashford, Judge Okafor said. Her voice was careful, but not cold, the carefulness of a judge who is recalibrating the map of a proceeding she thought she understood. I will allow you to address the matter of your entry, but I will first need to review your credentials and your standing in this matter. Of course, Your Honor. Sebastian placed the portfolio on the table before Miriam Cross, who was sitting with both hands flat on the table and her eyes very wide, and something in her face that was unmistakably the expression of a woman who has just been told that the cavalry has not only arrived, but was in fact a standing army. You will find there full documentation of our firm standing, Mrs. Ashford's legal representation agreement, and additionally, a pause, the most eloquent pause, a comprehensive counterfiling to every document submitted by opposing counsel this morning, prepared over the past 18 months. 18 months. The words moved through the gallery like a stone through still water. Gerald Whitmore had turned fully in his seat now. He was looking at Cornelius Ashford. Cornelius Ashford, who was looking at the front of the courtroom with that expression of quiet volcanic fury, reached forward and placed one large age-spotted hand on Eleanor's shoulder. Eleanor did not turn around. She placed her hand over his. And something in her posture, something almost imperceptible, something that only a person watching with real attention could have seen, changed. The set of her shoulders eased, fractionally. The line of her spine, already straight, somehow found an additional quietness, like a tree that has been standing in wind for a long time, finally feeling the wind stop. Gerald's pale blue eyes went from Cornelius to Sebastian to the associates to Lady Vivienne, who was still looking at him with those unblinking, ancient, diamond-dark eyes, and back to Cornelius. And Gerald Whitmore, for the first time in a very long time, looked uncertain. His attorney Hargrove had leaned close and was speaking rapidly in a low voice. Gerald was not really listening. He was doing the arithmetic that he should have done 31 years ago. He was calculating at last the weight of the name Ashford, the family foundation, the property holdings, the legal firm, Ashford and Associates, one of the most feared litigation firms in the country, the firm whose name he had seen in legal publications and never once connected to his own wife, because he had never once thought to look. Mr. Whitmore was married to an Ashford. Someone in the gallery whispered. That Ashford? Someone else said. Lady Vivienne, from her wheelchair, turned her ancient gaze away from Gerald at last. She looked at Eleanor, and she said in French, clearly enough for the people near her to hear it, Je suis ill, ma crée. Nous sommes tous ill. I am here, my darling. We are all here. Eleanor turned, for the first time since entering the courtroom, to look behind her. She looked at her grandmother, her father's hand on her shoulder, her brother standing with his portfolio and his 40 years of devastating legal precision, waiting to begin. Her face did something then. It was not a dramatic expression. It was not the expression of a movie heroine in a moment of triumph. It was smaller than that, and larger than that, the expression of a woman who has been standing alone in the cold for a very long time and has just felt the warmth return. Her eyes filled. She did not let the tears fall, but her lips shaped, silently, 2 words toward her grandmother. "Thank you." And Lady Vivienne Ashford Rousseau, 94 years old, straightened in her violet dress and her ropes of pearls, and she nodded once, the precise final nod of a woman who has never doubted the outcome of this day for a single moment, because she raised this family. And this family does not lose. Now, full, rising. The orchestral inevitability of something that was always going to happen arriving at last. Douglas Hargrove was a composed man. He was a man who had spent 30 years in courtrooms and had developed, through practice and professional necessity, the ability to recalibrate under pressure without showing the seams of the recalibration. He was having a difficult morning. Sebastian Ashford had taken Miriam Cross's place at the primary table, gently, with complete professional courtesy, installing her beside him as co-counsel with the smooth efficiency of a man who wastes nothing and dismisses no one, and had begun to speak. He spoke for 11 minutes without pause. What he laid before Judge Okafor in those 11 minutes was not simply a counter-argument. It was a dismantlement, systematic, documented, and lethal in its precision. The 18 months of preparation were evident in every sentence. Financial forensics from 3 independent firms. Documentation of the offshore account structures that Gerald had believed were buried beyond discovery. Evidence of asset concealment across 4 jurisdictions. Character testimony from individuals whose names, when Sebastian read them aloud, caused several people in the gallery to sit noticeably straighter. And, most devastatingly, the 31-year accounting of Eleanor's contribution to the marital estate, not as a vague claim of domestic service, but as a fully costed, professionally audited, legally structured economic analysis that assigned precise monetary value to every year of household management, every year of estate administration, every board position, every hour of foundation work that had, in some cases, directly supported the business reputation and community standing that Gerald Whitmore's commercial success had been built upon. Hargrove objected. Sebastian responded. Hargrove objected again. Sebastian responded again, each time with the particular devastating calm of a man who has anticipated every objection because he has spent 18 months assuming he would face them and building answers that were better than the objections deserved. Judge Okafor sustained 2 of Sebastian's counter-motions and overruled 3 of Hargrove's objections in a span of 20 minutes. Her expression remained neutral, but she was reading the documentation that Sebastian's associates had arranged before her with the focused attention of a judge who has encountered something she did not expect when she arrived this morning. Gerald Whitmore was very still. This was the most alarming version of Gerald, not the loud, expansive, laughing Gerald of the morning, but this one. This quiet one. This pale one. The one sitting with his hands flat on the table and his expensive cufflinks no longer catching the light and his pale blue eyes moving rapidly across the room as if looking for an exit that is not on any of the walls. Hargrove leaned close. Gerald shook his head slightly, a barely perceptible movement that meant, in the private language of a client and his attorney, "I don't have answers for this." He did not have answers because he had built his entire strategy on a single foundational assumption. He had assumed Eleanor was alone. He had assumed that the woman he had spent 31 years refusing to truly see had no one behind her. That the composed, silver-haired woman in the dove-gray dress with the cognac handbag was exactly what she appeared to be to a man who had never looked past the surface, alone, outgunned, and easily finished. He had not asked who she was before she was his wife. He had not asked what name she had been born into. He had not asked because the asking would have required a quality he had never developed. the genuine curiosity about another person that is the basic prerequisite for actually knowing them. Cornelius Ashford, seated behind his daughter, had not moved since he placed his hand on Eleanor's shoulder. He did not need to move. His presence was its own argument. He sat with his carved ebony cane resting across his knees and his granite face looking forward, and the weight of 91 years and everything those years contained simply occupied the room. Gerald looked at him once more. Cornelius looked back. And in that look, old man to old man, across 40 feet of courtroom and the wreckage of 31 years, the entire architecture of Gerald Whitmore's confidence quietly, completely, and permanently collapsed. He had humiliated this man's daughter. In public. On the record. And that man had watched every second of it. Malevolence that has the weight of consequence. Mr. Hargrove, said Judge Okafor, I will need a recess to review the submitted documentation. This proceeding is more complex than the morning filing suggested. It was, by the standards of judicial understatement, the most devastating thing said in Courtroom 7 all day. The music softens, warm now, resolved, the emotional release after a long holding. Natural light. A sense of air returning to a room that had none. The recess lasted 40 minutes. When it ended, the proceeding that Douglas Hargrove had confidently expected to conclude in Gerald's favor before lunch had become something else entirely, something longer, more complex, and considerably more dangerous for his client. Summary judgment was denied. The full evidentiary hearing was scheduled. Sebastian Ashford's counterfiling was admitted in its entirety. In the corridor outside Courtroom 7, Eleanor stood with her father's hand in both of hers. He was looking down at her, this 91-year-old man who had built a life and a legacy and a family, looking at his daughter with the expression that no word in any language quite captures, but every person with a parent who truly sees them recognizes immediately. You didn't need to come, she said. Her voice was steady, but only just. No, Cornelius agreed. His voice, even at 91, was a deep, resonant baritone. We needed to be here. Those are not the same thing. Lady Vivienne, in her violet, reached up from her wheelchair and took Eleanor's face in both hands, those ancient, beringed, small hands, and held it. Ton tais jamais seul, she said. You were never alone. I know, Eleanor said, and she meant it differently now than she had when she carried those words into the courtroom that morning. Now she meant it not as a comfort held against fear, but as a truth held alongside triumph. Sebastian appeared at her side. He said nothing dramatic. He said, We'll talk through the next steps tonight. Come to dinner. It was the most matter-of-fact sentence in the world, and it was, in its complete normalcy, in its assumption of course you will come to dinner. You are family. The most emotionally devastating sentence of the entire day. Eleanor Constance Ashford stood in the corridor of the courthouse in her dove-gray dress with her silver hair and her cognac bag and the quiet, extraordinary, undefeated reality of who she had always been, and she breathed, and for the first time all morning, the breath did not cost her anything. Because here is what Courtroom 7 learned today. The woman who sits alone is not always the woman without power. Sometimes she is the woman with the deepest power of all, the power of a family who love her, the power of a name she was born into, the power of people who were always, always coming. Sometimes the woman who appears to have nothing is the woman who simply chose the right moment to show everything. Never, not once, not ever, mistake someone's composure for surrender. And never mistake a woman's stillness for the absence of everything that stands behind her.